Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 356, which is our first podcast of 2022 featuring Dan Englesson and Erik Johansson from Goodbye Kansas. And we've been wanting to have them on for a long time to talk about something that's actually, to be honest, very exciting to me, and that's pipeline. And why do I say it's so exciting? Because we know that pipeline is going to change drastically in the next few years, and it already has been changing. And they are people like those guys from Goodbye Kansas are really going to help us figure out what are the software requirements and how we're going to do it. So very thankful for them to be part of this. But Kristen, this, like I said, this is a very technical podcast, yes. But something I really enjoyed. What were your thoughts on this?
Well, it was good to hear about how like Erik and Dan started at Goodbye Kansas and the career paths that led them there, and how they just started off with 4 people in the pipeline and now they're 12. And like you said, they talk about the pipeline process in VFX, just how it's changed over the years, and then in particular the open source products that create a more efficient pipeline, which gives them ability to focus on a lot more important stuff. So you guys go into a lot about that, and then you talk about USD. Huge part of it, and just kind of how that helps with shading and lighting, managed in Hydra. But I mean, you guys, I'm not. You're the USD guy, so
yeah. Vlado's been put me on an assignment to really get involved into USD stuff, and so I have, and it's been very interesting to hear that. And our products are made because of the input that we get from our customers, and these guys have been really, really good at helping us figure out how we need to shape our USD process for V-Ray, and it was really great to be able to do that. And we're very excited, obviously, for a lot of the stuff we're doing in V-Ray for Houdini as well, and that's also thanks to what they've been doing for us. So I enjoyed it. I think it was really cool. I actually think USD is not just going to be something for the visual effects industry. I think it's going to affect absolutely everything we do on the internet even. So really hearing how that's shaping up is very, very interesting to me. Okay, so like I said, this is our first podcast of the year of 2022, and we don't really have many announcements just yet. But if people want to know more about the podcast, Kristen, where can they go?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. Or if you'd like to watch us, go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Perfect. And that being said, please enjoy this episode, number 356, with Dan Englesson and Erik Johansson.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Been wanting to talk to you guys at Goodbye Kansas for a while. I've got lots of things I need to ask you questions about. I'm very excited about some of the things you're doing with your Houdini stuff, and the progress we worked with you guys on V-Ray for Houdini for a while. So I definitely want to talk about some of those things. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about you guys and your backgrounds and how you ended up fitting into Goodbye Kansas, and tell me a little bit about that. So Erik, you want to start first?
Yeah, being the old timer at the company almost at this time.
How long you been at Goodbye Kansas?
Yeah, so since things like 10 years now, almost.
Wow. Okay.
So it's a stretch. But yeah, so I studied civil engineering in media technology. I think it translates to.
Okay.
It's kind of like a Master of Science in close to computer science, but with a more 3D approach.
Okay.
And initially I was more into I thought I was going to make games. But then after being there, I realized that I don't really care about how quickly it runs. I don't need it to run 60 frames per second. I'd rather get one pretty picture out instead. So most of the studies was focused against VFX related stuff, simulations, and some gaming projects snuck in as well, but most of it towards VFX. After that, I did my master thesis, wrote a Maya plugin for fracturing geometry, which was like a copy paste almost of Rayfire for 3ds Max at the moment, but nothing existed for Maya. And then I went to, as I mentioned briefly before, to LA for like half a year, hang out at Side Effects, did an internship there.
Oh, nice.
But then it was pain in the ass to get a visa in the States, so I went back to Sweden, worked as a IT consultant for a little while. Didn't really like that. That was not my not my cup of tea at all. But then after a while, Frederick, the founder of F-Track, that was then the CTO at Fido, gave me a call if I wanted to join Fido, which is one of the companies that merged into Goodbye Kansas later down the road. So that's where I ended up, where I am now.
Okay, awesome. And what about you, Dan? How did you end up where you are now?
I started playing with Blender very early on when I was like in high school and stuff, and thought it was really cool. So I think, looking back on, like, I saw some Git repo the other day and tried to figure it out which Blender version I started on, and it was in 2004 on 243 or something like that. It was an old one. I always remember the splash screen when you see that in the beginning there. So I started out like modeling and rendering and doing all of that, and got interested in like the sort of technology behind it. And when it was time for going to university, I found in the same education as Erik did as well. So we ended up there in Norrköping, Sweden there as well. I think the focus has always been to do VFX, really, since that was like what interested me, like creating 3D characters and animation and stuff like that. And then the technology behind it was super interesting. So that education, the media technology in Norrköping, gave a really nice like ground to stand on when developing tools and VFX in general. And then I did my internship at a moving picture company in London, and did some post-based deformations for zombies for the World War Z, which was fun. It was exciting to be in London as well, going out into the world. And then I did an internship at Pixar Animation Studios in San Francisco. So moved over there and worked on Finding Dory on that internship. And then, stuck around there a couple of years and worked on a lot of movies there. So that was a very fun experience, going from internship to full-time and then working there for a couple of years. So
wow.
And then it was time to move back to Sweden and found GBK, or Goodbye Kansas, which seemed to do really cool things. So it was great. And it was also at the point of time where all the streaming services were picking up. So before it wasn't a lot of VFX in Sweden, but now with Netflix and all the other streaming services, the work started to pick up and become more VFX heavy. So it was a perfect time to just come back home to Sweden to start on that. And since we started, we've been growing from 4 people in pipeline or Erik and Joachim in the beginning, and then up to 4 people. And now we're, 11 or something like that?
12 even, if you count me.
12 people, okay. Yeah. Well, pipeline...
hoping for more.
I mean, so you guys have you guys always sort of like been in pipeline and tool building and things of that nature? Has that been your sort of focus over these years?
For me, it's always been the focus. I also have a pretty big interest in like Houdini overall and simulations and etc. But I've always done a lot of coding as well, and a lot of like managing Linux servers and all types of weird infrastructure stuff.
Right.
So pipeline fitted me very well. I also really like to like optimize stuff. Like whenever we can make stuff more efficient, it feels good in the stomach, so to say.
Yeah, it's a strange satisfaction to make things more efficient. Yeah. I hear you. Okay, well that's great. Now you did mention like I've actually did a podcast with Goodbye Kansas many years ago, and I know that obviously, like you said, your company has changed quite a bit over the years and has grown quite a bit. Like how big is Goodbye Kansas now? Like how many people are in the company?
It's a little bit hard to say during like COVID times. Usually, otherwise, I kept pretty good track of like all the people that joined and left and etc. But I think we are around like 250 maybe or something like that.
Sounds about
across
right.
Stockholm, London, and now also some people in Vancouver joining as well.
Right. Okay. So you're
around those numbers.
You're like a big enough studio that you have presence in London and Vancouver.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. And obviously, I know you guys are doing a ton of work, across different things in both streaming and I'm sure the feature film world as well. Right.
Yeah, some feature film. It's been mostly TV. Like the subsidies hits us pretty hard in Stockholm, but the London office have been doing way more feature film work, so to say.
Okay, interesting. So subsidy work. You get because you don't get tax subsidies the same way that London does. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
no.
Right. And streaming doesn't care as much about the subsidies. Is that what it is, or?
I don't know if they don't care or if they have better budget or.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it might be just too much work that they need to get it done and
right.
will pay for it.
Well, that's great. Well, you guys do really great work, so they're getting a good deal. So that's cool. All right, so that's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about pipeline. Like you guys both been thinking about pipeline. I mean, you've obviously Dan you're talking about it back at Pixar, and Erik, you've been thinking about Houdini for a long time. So what is your thoughts about how pipeline has changed over the last 10-15 years? Like what's been the things that have influenced the way that a visual effects pipeline has been, and where was it before, and how did it become what it is today? What are your thoughts on that?
Me personally, one thing I think I've changed a lot is all the like open source projects and open source standards has made it a lot easier to build like an efficient pipeline. So you don't have to do as much like grunt work. You can more focus on the higher level stuff on top, the cherry on top, so to say.
Right.
Is that
glue it together, so to speak.
So what are some of those open? I mean, obviously USD is the new thing. One big, not new, but it's a thing a lot of people are focusing on, and we'll get to USD in a second. Is there other tools out there that are also interesting in a lot of ways?
Just even like with Alembic when that came out, and like the OpenImage.io, OpenEXR, OpenColor.io, trying to start looking at OpenTimeline.io as well. And it's like all these projects with smart people working on them. It really makes it possible to build a lot of stuff without writing a ton of code.
Yes.
Even if we write a ton of code, but for the right purpose instead.
And then we have Houdini as well, which has focused a lot on the simulation part, so you don't have to spend a ton of resources doing new simulations. You can just ride on what Houdini does there and focus on that. Focus on other things for us instead, to just glue everything together and build pipelines around it, which is a new thing compared to previously, where you had to sort of write your fluid solver yourself and then put that in the pipeline and do everything from scratch, really.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Also a lot more I think it's a lot more applications now than it was when I started. Then it was like Maya, some Houdini, some Mari, and it was like Substance, Unreal, Marvelous. It's like all the toolbox for VFX artists to like make their pictures has grown a lot. It feels like
So I remember when I started in visual effects back in 2001. So I mean, you had to write everything because there was no tools for it, right? So everyone had their own compositor that they wrote, their own everything, right? So proprietary software was the thing. what was also interesting about the visual effects studios at that time is they would talk about their proprietary software as if it was their secret sauce. Like it was our proprietary software is better than their proprietary software, and that's why our stuff looks better. But that's not the case as much anymore. There's actually, like, Marvelous Designer is a fantastic cloth simulator. You don't need to write another one. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
Time is saved.
Yeah. So would you say that right now, like, the actual pipeline that you guys are building is, what's the term that people use, more fit for purpose software than actually proprietary software in some ways?
I would say maybe a little bit both, because it's still trying to adhere to like how we want to work and how it fits our like culture and like how people want to do. Just like go through the process of pushing out a project. And I think also us having like in-house directors and etc., we have to always be like very on our toes because stuff can change quickly.
Right.
So it's a little bit different to like, here's these shots, do this, and you have a very clear specification of what you're gonna do. That might change a lot of times for us during a project.
Right. So what is the Goodbye Kansas way of working? That's a little bit like, what is the general philosophy there?
Well, we heavily utilize F-Track in that sense, and then built a tool around like launching tasks and setting up our environment and stuff like that, to sort of streamline the process of just like, here's my shot, launch it, and grab all the things needed.
Okay.
I would say is one of the things I've seen is a really good thing that we have that has been a little bit harder at other studios to do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like trying to hide like command line interfaces and stuff from artists, like they shouldn't need to learn that really if they're used to, like, why we can just make an interface for it instead that is easier to grasp and you don't have to remember which flag to use and set the shot and etc. It should just be available so they can start working instead.
Right. Now, what's your general feeling? And I think, I think that's obviously a good TD and a good pipeline is going to make it so that someone can come up to speed very quickly and continue to work very quickly, right? But there's also, a balance that needs to be made where someone who, never worked at Goodbye Kansas can come online very quickly as well, so they can start working without too much friction or learning curve on your pipeline. How do you balance your concept of efficiency with the learning process of other people?
That's a good question. It's a hard one. I don't really have an answer for that.
No, I don't think we have a set out plan for it.
Right.
But I think it helps that we get a lot of freelancers that has been at other companies, and we also have like various staff employees that go abroad and work at other places and kind of come back with ideas for us of like, this worked really good at this place. Could you make something similar for us? That's
good. So you do have like, you do listen to, oh, that's how they do it here. That's a pretty good idea. And you sort of try to figure out how to integrate those things. Yeah. It's very different. I went to the Sony ImageWork back in 2005. And back then everything was so proprietary that it was 2 weeks of training that we had to go through and literally take classes on their process and pipeline before they would approve us to start working on a shot. And that seems like a lot of money for that system.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's burning through cash.
But I think that's the thing also with the open source tool set that you can have in the VFX industry. Like, you might have someone that learns, well, in this case, USD. If you have learned USD, you know the terms and all that stuff.
Right.
and that is usually the same around different places. And same goes for different applications like Maya and Houdini. Like if you know Houdini, it's pretty easy to pick that up and start using that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's talk a little bit about open source software, right? Because the thing about open source is, especially things like OpenColor.io or USD or anything of those things, is those systems basically are relying on the community to continue to help develop those systems, right? So what is Goodbye Kansas's philosophy in terms of contributing to the open source system?
We are trying to open source some stuff that we've built lately and want to commit more to existing projects as well. I don't know if we got some USD stuff in, maybe.
Not open source yet, but we're looking into it. So, for instance, our FTrack, there's this resolver that you can sort of talk to and sort of take this FTrack asset on FTrack and kind of resolve it to a file on disk.
Okay.
And we've written a FTrack resolver that does that for USD. So it's sort of a plugin that you can write for, say, Shotgun or other project manager or management systems. And we've written one of those, and that is something that we would like to open source in the future. But we're not there yet. We want to kind of bang our heads against it a little bit more before we release it, and there's also legal stuff that has to go through to make that happen. But that's definitely something that we would like to open source at some point.
Okay.
And then
and I think everyone in our department would like to contribute more. But it's also like, I think it comes a little bit with size as well, so to say. We are this like mid-size company, and most of the bigger projects are driven by the bigger places, so to say.
Right.
But I think for sure, if we find something that we feel like this we need to do, and this we can help out with, and this will be a good benefit for the open source project, we will try and push it back to the community.
Right. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about USD since you brought it up. So USD sort of been, in conversation in the visual effects industry for years. But what I remember specifically is everyone says, especially when they were talking to Chaos Group, it's like, are you going to support USD? And we would say, do you use USD? And they would say, no, but we want to use USD. It's like, what do you need for us to support USD? And then, so there's been this promise of USD for years and years and years of, it was going to be the one ring to rule them all. And everyone was very excited about it. But it wasn't until recently that people really started to adapt it in more seriously as an actual practical pipeline tool. So what have you noticed? Like, what are some of the things that, got you guys to say, aha, we're now want to get into USD and really make this something that we work with?
Yeah, I guess just coming from Pixar and worked on Finding Dory was the first official launch with USD and the RIS renderer. And having that experience coming back from Pixar to GBK, that was something that I wanted to push for. And then we went to SIGGRAPH as well, and that was just buzzing with USD everywhere. So after that, we were like, we should jump on this train as well. And this was in 2000, was it 18? I think it was.
Yeah, I think around 18-ish. And it was around the time that Side Effects had started building Solaris. And for me, at least, it felt like a pretty stable ground to stand on. If they make a big commitment to this, it's very likely that more people will follow. And I think it was also around that time that Animal Logic has started open sourcing their Maya plugin and Pixar and etc. So all the it wasn't just only this open source standard anymore. There were actually pieces that you could use to build your pipeline.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
different
let's,
PCCs jumping in.
Before we get too much into it, and I understand, I know what USD is obviously, and I understand what Solaris is, but let's give, so for some people, let's say who may just be new to visual effects and say, okay, I know what is USD and how is it different from, let's say, what we used to use, things like FBX or even Alembic? Like how does it different? Because some people think, oh, it's just another, like format, universal file format. Yeah. So what makes it special?
I think that's I think that's the first thing you think of when you hear USD, that it's like, oh, this is the new file format. It's Alembic 2.0, and I'm going to use it the same way as Alembic, but it's so much more. It's like you can store the entire scene description inside USD, so universal scene description. So it's not just geometry. You can store shaders. You can store all the information of cameras and stuff like that in it. So you sort of get this nicely bundled package of everything that you can ship off. And that is a very powerful thing, since otherwise you would have like the shaders in one place and you would have geometry in one place and you would try to pull it together, and just trying to ship that between different DCCs, say Maya and Houdini. That is something that was cumbersome before, and you had to write specific tooling to do that. Now you just store it in USD, so you can create an asset in USD and have that have geometry, shading, and also maybe referencing in some Maya rigging or any other type of rig, and just have that transfer through to different DCCs without having to think about it so much. Like it will just be handled by say Houdini or Maya, so life becomes much easier in that sense. And since it's open source and more software companies picks it up, you get like, oh, now Nuke supports USD, and then you can say, oh, okay, nice, we're just gonna plug and play here,
right? And
now we have USD for Nuke, and so that's really good. But in a sense, yes, it is a file format, and you store all the files on disk, but it's 100 and maybe 100,000 or 200,000 files if it's a shot or something like that. But all these combines into layers, so you can think of it, say, like Photoshop, where you can combine, say, geometry in one layer, you do shading in one layer, and you can combine it into an asset in the end that is being resolved into a
just from a practical point of view, I understand, but from a practical point of view, someone is like has a file that just has the shaders, has another file that just has the geometry, and has another file that just has the cameras, and another one that just has the lights, right? And then you have a top layer that says references all those files and then combines them together, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so that's kind of nice, because you can write your shaders out of one application, you can write your lights out of another application, you can write your explosions out of another application.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things when we started using USD is like, we're just going to shade in Houdini, and that's it. And you get the shader coming up in Maya, you get it in Unreal and stuff like that. So you don't have to like shade it thrice, you just do it once and be good. So that's a huge benefit for us.
Right.
And I think it's worth mentioning the like collaborative working as well, that you get in a much different way, because you don't have to like rebuild the scene between each application. Like whatever edits the animators or the layouts or whatever do just trickles down to the other departments without them having to like go into any system, keep track of what assets to use. They just open their shot, and if the animators has hidden this character, then it shouldn't be in the shot, so to say.
Right.
So when you finally get to lighting, they don't have to build any scene. They don't have to take in any cameras. They can just like sit down and light instead of build scenes.
Right.
Which is, I'm super.
It's a pipeline dream, right? It's a pipeline dream, because basically, because then the animator or whoever is, whatever task they're doing, the lighter for the guy basically does, or the girl who does all the scene assembling, right? They're just like, give me all the latest, everything that's published, and it all just comes in, right? Ideally.
So you definitely take away a lot of the like overhead of your starting lighting or rigging or animating or anything like that. So it's just like, here's my character, I start animating on him right away. I don't care, like I don't know if he's supposed to be in the shot, but I see that, oh, this is the character I should animate on, and I don't need to bring him in or anything like that. He should just be there for you to start animate.
Right.
And same with lighting, you can set it up. And then it's very powerful with USD with the inheritance, so sublayering in. So we have this sequence workflow type thing where you can say put in a sequence light, so you can do a base setup of lighting, and all the shots underneath it will just inherit that lighting, and you just do it once, and every shot gets it.
Right.
And then you can just go in and do some edits in certain shots that needs it, and like 90% might be just that works fine. We don't need to touch that.
Right.
So this will definitely just speed up the workflow of being able to push through a lot more shots.
Yes.
So, it's a game changer for us, really.
Yeah. But let's talk a little bit about there's the questions, right? Like, so for example, your lighting and your shading, et cetera, right? So the thing specifically about lighting and shading is that those are from rendering purposes, or from renderers in a lot of ways. And different renderers have different ways of describing shading and different ways of describing lighting. So how do you tackle that? So you can't just take something created in Arnold and open it in, and it'll work in V-Ray and use all the proper shading and lighting, right? How does USD manage that process?
Yeah, so we do have there's this USD preview surface that is it's supported inside USD by default, and it's a very basic shader that you can plug in diffuse color, you can plug in specular and stuff like that. But it's still a physically based shader, and it's working pretty nicely. So you can definitely use that for sort of having that as the base for just displaying in the Storm or Hydra viewport if you're just doing rasterizing, moving around.
Right.
But then this Hydra framework that ships with USD is really powerful, where you can actually specify saying, if I'm rendering with V-Ray, then use my V-Ray shader. If I'm rendering with Arnold, then use my Arnold shader. And everything there is handled by Hydra, and it's stored in USD. So we can set up an asset that we can put in a library, and you can have shaders set up just once for V-Ray, for Arnold, for RenderMan, for any other type of renderer, and real-time shaders as well. And then Hydra figures out you want to view V-Ray. Okay, here's the V-Ray shader for you.
Right.
So that's super powerful for us in that sense.
Yeah, I was very interested in Hydra. I mean, Hydra is, I guess that's the reason they call it Hydra is it's the multi-headed monster, right? So that it can render in any renderer that you want, as long as they support Hydra. So is that, I mean, USD obviously is the file format that holds all the different types of data that you may need in a scene description. But Hydra, in a sense, is a viewport. Am I correct?
It's the framework for taking the scene description and translating it to a specific render that you have chosen to render. And USD ships with, by default, this Storm OpenGL renderer, which is super fast and very snappy. And we really like that one too.
Okay.
Because it's if you were to view it in Maya or in Houdini, you get the same textures and same everything looks the same in both DCCs.
Nice.
So you don't have to do anything special, here's the Maya shaders or anything like that. It just comes in nice. But
Storm was called Hydra first as well, right? Wasn't that confusing a ton of people?
It is super confusing.
Okay, so it's Hydra renderer inside of Hydra is basically what it was.
I think it was, I thought it was like that for a while. That both their OpenGL renderer and the translation Hydra was both called Hydra for a little bit.
It's called Storm now, at least. And, just to kind of separate the two from each other, and Hydra is the framework and Storm is the OpenGL renderer there. It's been very interesting working together with Chaos to kind of get V-Ray up and running. So we have had a really nice collaboration there with Andre Engosho and been chatting a ton on how to implement this in the best way possible.
Yeah. And I'm going to get to V-Ray. But I want to get some good groundwork.
Sure.
I'm going to get some good groundwork on this
absolutely.
stuff. So let's talk a little bit about, obviously this is a file format that has a lot of different kinds of data and it's complicated, et cetera, et cetera. How is the performance of this product, and how does that compare with different DCCs, and how, all of that, like reading all this data in, like, is it slow?
It is fast.
It's fast, right? Okay.
It is really fast, especially with the open, like the Storm viewport renderer. You can get a lot more data into the viewport and like animate with context. Instead of just bringing proxy, you might be able to bring in higher resolution of the geometry in the background and stuff like that.
Right.
So that definitely is a big push forward. And then it also loads faster. And also, instead of having this pull system of saying, give me all assets and build sort of the scene, we just load and then here's the shot for you. And that's what you're getting.
Right.
So that is, and that loads pretty fast as well compared to before. So
okay,
yeah, performance-wise, it's much better.
Right. So
it might be worth mentioning that it's also faster to like start renders because you don't have to have this middle ground format to do your rendering. You're essentially rendering your scene directly, like you would start rendering directly from your Maya binary or HIP file without having to do any translation. It just goes directly to the render instead.
Right. That's very exciting. Very exciting for sure. Okay, so real quick, now let's talk about Houdini. So obviously, back in the day, that was, you'd have your visual effects studio, and most people would have Maya at their desk, right? And then you'd have a couple of guys who are doing explosions or some big sea monster or whatever crazy simulation, and those were the Houdini guys, right? And that was the thing. They were the only guys using Houdini, and it was a specialized seed. So in recent years, I've noticed massive interest in Houdini that has happened more recently, and specifically Houdini for scene assembly, which was Maya traditionally had been seen as something for scene assembly. So I believe, one of my feelings is probably the reason that people are looking at Houdini so carefully now is based on the way that they have embraced USD. Would you say that is something that is true in a lot of ways?
I think it's for sure one thing that is making, I know a bunch of studios testing Solaris at the moment and looking at switching to it, but I also knew some that switched before as well, that just wanted something more flexible and easier to pipeline, so to say. It is if you do the lighting in the normal SOP context where we do now, it is probably slightly gnarlier than doing it maybe in Maya or Katana or something like that.
Right.
But you have a lot of possibilities for what you can do that you can lose out in other applications. It's a beast of handling stuff.
Okay. Let's talk about that. Let's first of all distinguish to people what is Solaris and how does that different from just plain Houdini? Okay, can you explain those two different things?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
I can take it. Solaris is sort of like the USD place that you go into, and inside there you have this stage, which is sort of where all your USD files resolves to. So it resolves into a stage that is sort of a flattened version of all your files that you have on disk.
Right.
And in there you can do all your USD stuff. They have built around USD in that Solaris context. So Solaris is an editor of USD files, so to speak. And then, you have the normal SOP context, and so it's just a different context within Houdini there.
Within Houdini.
And then, yeah.
So Solaris sounds like it's like Houdini's implementation of something similar to what Katana was doing in some ways, right?
Yeah, I think that's what I started out, at least to be. Like, this is going to be this lighting package that uses USD, so you can do layout of lighting and maybe some layout as well.
Right.
And then, bring in some USD asset and then do lighting. I think that was the main goal. And then, some look dev as well. And now it's sort of just exploded, and it's like, oh, we can do this, we can do that, and it's like, oh, this is so powerful.
Yeah.
It's just like it's a very nice editor of USD context.
Yeah.
And I think they have realized that, and like in Houdini 19 here with the new layout node that comes out, that you can do layout in a much nicer way than what you could before. And stuff like that. It's just like, it's going to be so nice to be in the Solaris context going forward.
I think it's interesting.
Unifies everything.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I remember when I was when I was at Sony around 2005 is when they first were writing Katana at Sony, right? And so they're like, oh, they're making a scene assembly program called Katana, and it says it's kind of going to look like Houdini. And it's funny that it's come full circle. I get a lot of and it's kind of interesting. Okay, so let's talk about bringing artists online and in Houdini, because Houdini was always seen as this beast of a package, and Maya people always had a little problem sort of moving over to a Houdini process in some ways. How has Solaris made some of that easier? Is it pretty easy to pick up or understand, or is it still is it going to take some time for the scene assembly community to sort of embrace this and be able to be trained into something like Solaris?
I think it depends. I don't know. Yeah, I think it depends. For us at GBK, we have done some tooling around it, so it should be like very familiar and easy for everyone to like pick it up. So we have like a node that you can initiate. You drop down and you jump in there, and you have sort of your context, sort of your layer to do your edits in. And if you're in lighting, you do your lighting in there, and you publish that to your lighting layer. And if you're in layout, there's actually no difference. You just drop down the same node and you do your layout inside that node. So if you're a lighter or layout artist, the difference in there is just like what type of nodes you drop down, and if you import assets or if you import lights or do light rigs in there. So that will like sort of make everything unified. So like it's familiar to everyone. Previously, we've had like if an FX artist does one thing, it's completely different from what like a lighter would do in the scene. So this sort of unifies everything into a streamlined pipeline.
Yeah.
In Solaris there. So yeah.
And I think we might have a easier road, so to say, because we are already like using Houdini, so people are like familiar with the interface, contexts, and like the usual Houdini things. If you're going from Maya to Houdini, or from, I would say it's the same if you go from Maya to Katana or Maya to Gaffer or something like that. It's just a different mindset for thinking in nodes instead of, well, they have nodes in Maya as well, but you don't maybe see them as much when you build up your lighting setup, so to say.
Yeah. But I think that's interesting, especially, if it's, if it loads fast, that's something, because it's always been a thing. You're trying to assemble this giant monster inside of Maya sometimes can be a little bit slow.
Yeah, and USD helps with that, where you have this proxy purpose. So you can say like load this with a lower resolution, but once I hit render, it just switches automatically to the full res version.
Right.
Which makes it very nice to just, here's my OpenGL viewport with some proxy geometry. And then once I go render, I don't have to go and switch every asset to be a different version, or we don't need to set up a script to do that on the fly when you start to render. It just happens automatically, which is, super nice.
Because it's already stored in the asset. Like the asset is published with this configuration, so the artist doesn't have to, like the lighting artist doesn't have to care about it.
Right.
It's just open and click.
Well, it seems also that, like, based on what you guys are talking about, it seems that USD is it's best used when you read and write to it. Right? Like some of the, I mean, I think I've heard of, some use cases where other applications, yes, we support USD, but all they do is they read in the data and then they keep it in their format and they don't actually use the USD file directly. Is that true?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say very much.
That's sort of the Alembic 2.0 version, I would say, that people kind of imagine, like take this USD file and treat it as a file format and bring that asset in or that scene in.
Right.
While in this case, like you have everything in the same context. You can switch out different assets. You can, switch versions and stuff like that in a like live context.
Right. So
I would say that's something.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Aaron.
It's lagging a little bit. So I think that's something we have seen and like in other places where they kind of do this. I don't know, not half implementation, but like they only use parts of it, and that's probably why it's taken us quite some time to actually implement our pipeline as well, because we tried to do like a full USD pipeline,
right.
Not only parts being USD.
Sure. Well, okay, so let's talk a little bit about V-Ray now. I know we're getting close on time, but I want to get all this background out of the way so we can get some context as to how it is. So I've known Andre for a long time. He's a really good guy, a very funny guy, and an excellent pool player, by the way. But he's obviously got into the Houdini as part of the Houdini head of V-Ray for Houdini, and sort of embraced this and sort of looked at what USD could do and what it is doing. And I know he's worked very closely with you guys in order to support a lot of the things going on. But what were some of the challenges? Now, if you're a renderer and you're trying to support something like USD, what are some of the challenges? What are some of the things that a renderer needs to do to really support a good USD pipeline?
I think to start with, it's like, you have to figure out that you have this Hydra framework that you can hook into. Like in the beginning, it's easy to just think that, this is just another file format. I'm just going to implement it the same way I've implemented all the other file formats, and like take USD, convert into our native format in the renderer, and then ship it off in VR Scene, for instance. But the other route, which is super powerful because you put it in Hydra. Hydra takes care of everything for you. So if you have some USD stuff, it ships into Hydra, converts it into so you just write your sort of plugin into Hydra, and then it figures it out for you and gives back that geometry and shaders and everything. And the thing is, if you do that once, you have that for, like in Maya, you have that in Houdini, you have that in, potentially Blender. It depends for licenses and stuff.
Sure.
But but it's like, instead of having to rewrite that, say like you have the USD in Maya, you want to bring that into V-Ray, then they might have their own little USD node that you have to sort of plug into your converter for USD and then ship it off into VR Scene. But if you have done it in Hydra, you have done it once. So I actually did a sneaky thing of, once we got it from Houdini, I took it and did the same thing for Maya as a test, just to see like this is, or to demonstrate that this is working. And we got it up in Maya. So you have it 90% there. You don't have the translation of, say, Maya lights going into USD, because that's something that,
it's different.
Say, Autodesk needs to implement to say, I have this translator of the lights into USD, and then that can just say, go to any renderer that supports this Hydra delegate.
Right.
So you get a lot of things for free if you write it to the Hydra delegate.
But that is the case, right? I mean, you just mentioned it's like everyone needs to support the Hydra system in the proper way, right? Are you finding that that's the case, or is it challenging? I'm sure you're like, if you want to create a USD, it's like, hey, Autodesk, I need you to do this. Hey, side effects, I need you to do this. Hey, chaos, I need you to do this. Like, is that what it is? It's like getting everyone in the same room, trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, I think so. And this Hydra delegate certainly does it.
Right.
So you like if you plug into this system, this is where data can come through really easily, and you just figure out like, oh, I just need to write this translator once, and it will work for all the rest. And then the DCC software companies can just figure out how to translate their native toolset into USD, and then you have this combination of renderer and DCCs without having to, rewrite it for every DCC. So I think that's going to be a huge game changer for any renderer, I would say.
Right.
But yeah, it's various support for various renderers through Hydra at the moment, so to say. And I think it's also been, I think most of the stuff is in the USD specification now, but there are still some ongoing discussions about like how different things should be represented in USD, where I think maybe side effects take some shortcuts for some stuff now, where they kind of like, before the standard is fully ready, we're gonna do it this way, which that should make it harder for people to implement, because then they can't just read the specification of USD and like, this we should implement.
Right.
They might have to know some stuff on a like application
on an application basis
level.
Right. So, but
still, it must be so much easier than implementing widely different specifications for each application.
But then at the same time, like what we had to do and from Chaos is we had to implement our own implementation of V-Ray inside of USD as well, right? So we had to find a way to describe a V-Ray light or a specific V-Ray shader inside of a USD format. Is that right?
It depends. If you say if you had a V-Ray light inside, in Solaris you don't necessarily have a V-Ray light. You have just one light that you drop down, and you would say that V-Ray supports it, and that comes through that you have to sort of write a translator to say that this, say, dome light in Houdini should translate into this dome light in V-Ray.
Okay.
And that's the only thing you need to do, but it's never storing really like V-Ray specific lights in the scene. But if you have a specific, say, we can take the VDBs, for instance. The VDB can be stored as a native format inside USD. And you can certainly write schemas to do similar stuff as well if needed. But for a renderer, that's not necessarily the case in many cases there. And it might be shading perhaps. But
you would have to translate the shading nodes into like how do you actually want to store this shader node inside of the USD file, so to say.
Right. Yeah, because there's definitely attributes to a V-Ray shader that are not going to be in other shaders that you need to store. Right?
Yeah, you can store pretty much anything in USD, so that you can certainly do.
So if this, the way that you're describing these things, that this file holds, or this series of files, in case they're all nested and layered and beautiful in that way, can store all of this information for you, which is basically, what file formats like VRScene and everything else were created to actually do the rendering. Technically speaking, if you could just, since you already wrote the USD, you may not need to write a VRScene file if you could get V-Ray to render directly, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you get with Hydra. You don't necessarily need to write it out as a VRScene first and then ship it all. You just write the sort of plugins to all the different geometry types and stuff like that, and that translates directly into to V-Ray, and you can start the render from there.
So does Hydra exist as a standalone thing that you can use as a command line renderer?
USD viewer. Yeah, no, you have a USD view that ships with USD. So you can launch that. It's sort of a little application that you can view, you can toggle around, and you can switch to different Hydra delegates. So in our case, we can switch to V-Ray and render V-Ray from a standalone USD file that we just load up in this little GUI with a 3D viewport and then render. And then you have the standalone tools such as USD record, where you can record with any type of delegate, and also Husk in Houdini that you can render from the Husk command there, which is what we're doing.
Right.
So yeah, it's like, yeah, you can basically load that USD view up and fire off with V-Ray and go and have a coffee and come back, and you have a nice scene rendered, and
It also saves you
and
a
it's
license.
also live, which is
Yes, and it opens up a lot of automation stuff as well.
Yeah.
Like you could essentially trigger re-renders of all your shots without having to open Houdini or Maya or any type of those applications. You just trigger it through
Yeah.
the USD file instead.
Because there was a lot of, back in the day, when you launch a render, you had to open up Maya. Maya would take the scene, create the VR scene file out of it, and then close Maya, and then V-Ray would render standalone, right? And that was now it's a process that you don't have to do that. You can go directly to just render.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we store all our shots in F-Track, and we can like the one plan that we have is just to right click on it and say go render, and it just ships off to the farmer render, and you don't have to open up Houdini or Maya or anything like that.
That's amazing. That's great.
Yeah, so that's going to be a huge time saver for us.
Okay, so now let's talk about where this is going to go further. How can we push this even further? And the reason I bring this up is something is like, okay, so NVIDIA has sort of embraced the whole idea of what USD can do to the max in terms of collaborative workflow and their thoughts about what the Omniverse thing that they've tried to do. What are your thoughts about a multi-pronged, bring it all together, like Hydra on steroids? Everyone is working at the same time and the same thing. Like, what's your ideas? What are your thoughts on that process, or be it through Omniverse or any other system?
I personally think it's super cool, but it might be a thing that works for like a certain type of project, because you might have projects where you don't want people to get new stuff all the time. Like you might want to have this approved before someone actually starts tinkering with it, to not like lose a lot of time. And I think also a lot of those workflows is very similar to like gaming workflows, where everyone works on the same thing all the time, and it goes into the same for like each shot. While we might have that, like, yeah, for this shot we really liked this version, or please stop here for this one, while we at the same time need to update the environment for some other shot, so to say, which is kind of tricky with that workflow at the moment, but they will most likely figure it out. But yeah, it's really cool stuff.
Yeah, for us, we're not using it completely on the steroid part of things. We have the versioning where we like sort of listen to stable or latest tags of assets. So you say like, bring me the latest of everything, and if someone publishes the latest one, you can get a pop-up saying, "Oh, you want to reload this one?" Yeah, and then it reloads for you.
Right.
Yeah, and in that sense, it's really good. So you have that sort of the push system. So you push out an asset instead of like pulling it and say like, oh, for all these shots, please update this version. And if you have 10,000 assets in it, then it's going to be pretty cumbersome to just go in and say click, 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 or write a tool for it. But with the push system, it's more like, oh, okay, this is now the new latest version or the stable one, and just go re-render all shots, and you have a new version of all of those. So yeah, that's a sort of a shift in how we sort of look at working, probably.
Right. Well, that's interesting.
So,
I
think, interesting.
Go ahead, Erik.
I think the like almost Google Docs approach of Omniverse is really cool, though. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if we see that more in VFX in a couple of years either. Because it's very powerful to be able to just have people push their tiny little edits from anywhere, and it all goes into the same file. Like you can have a ton of people working on the same stuff without anyone actually risking breaking something, because you can always just go back in like your stack and just like, no, we don't want this edit anymore, and it doesn't explode everything. It's just like, now we just don't do that part anymore.
I mean, but this process has been around, not necessarily in the visual effects world, but it has been around in the gaming world, right? So like things like, if you look at what Unreal is and how you do that, you can't just like up version your your Unreal project. It's way too big a project to just upversion, right?
Yeah.
So they have, you involve systems like Perforce as to be your versioning system in some ways. And is that something that you feel like, the visual effects industry may have to graduate from a traditional file versioning system to a Perforce type idea of versioning?
I hope not, because
No.
Perforce gives me headaches. But now they're also adding like USD support to Unreal, so that's something we are really looking at.
Right.
Especially with like if we already have shaded the asset, it will actually come into Unreal and look like proper, and we can use our normal look dev artist that doesn't have to be well versed, so to say, with Unreal or anything like that. They can be normal VFX artists working in their favorite software instead of in a specific editor,
Right.
But still produce content for that application.
Yeah, for sure.
And with the resolver that we have, that you can listen to a stable or a latest version of things, you can quickly update that in the scene without having the need to have a Perforce server, really. So everything is like tracked through FTrack.
Right.
But then imported into Unreal. So like the shot lives on FTrack, but you import it in the morning, and then like, oh, here we go.
Right.
Here's the new shot, and you do your thing in Unreal there. Still early days, but it's definitely a very interesting area that we're looking into.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's amazing. That's really cool. All right, Erik, I'm going to talk a little bit about, like, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast how you said you didn't really care about 60 frames a second. You'd rather get a nice image, right? But, and I get that, totally get that. I think a nice image is more valuable than a fast image. And if you just have a little patience, you'll just get everything, all the other images that you need. But what is your thoughts about real time and how, nowadays a lot of people are thinking about real time, and it's becoming more and more possible through, hardware and software development that have changed over the last few years. Do you think that real time is going to affect some of the things and the ways that you guys work in some ways?
I would say it's like already doing that. Like we already delivered a couple of shows in Unreal through a pretty like standard Unreal workflow, so to say.
Right.
I would still, I don't know, it's very strong opinions, but I would like it that you, like, because you still lose a lot of time. Like, even if you save time on rendering, you lose time on having to optimize things, and you have to make sure that, like, it doesn't go over the memory, and if we do this crazy thing, it will slow down like crazy. But it's catching up very, very quickly, so to say, with, like, Nanite in Unreal 5 now. Only for static geometry, you still can't have crazy ass moving geometry, right. But like it's getting closer and closer to what you can do in real time.
What I think is interesting about the real time is not necessarily the rendering, because I mean, honestly, like I graduated from rasterized rendering, 15 years ago. I don't want to render another shadow map. That's the way I feel about it. And Nanite is very interesting, but if you really think about what Nanite is basically what RenderMan was doing with brick maps, right? So it's very similar, right? And that's cool. But I think what's interesting specifically about real time is not necessarily the rendering part of the real time. It's the pipeline of real time, the feedback system of real time. Do you and then the ability to actually do if you want to do the rendering later, it could be you can render it in whatever. Do you think that there's a philosophy of real time that's going to change a little bit in some ways?
I think so. Like I think if we thought more about like VFX shows, the way they think about games, that like, let's just build this thing together and not muck around so much with every single detail, but maybe focus a little bit more on the end result, so to say, and the overall quality. I think that could, but it's about what quality level you want to get to, so to say. Can you swallow that some shots doesn't look perfect because you haven't had time to polish it from that angle?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, like specifically it's about, to me, the thing that I love the most about real time is iterations, right? If I can iterate fast, then I'm in good shape. I want to make a decision when my mouse finger is still down. You know what I mean? And then when I get to where I want, and I just let go, and then the decision is made, as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and try to hit that exactly. Do you know what I mean?
And also just getting nice feedback on perhaps lighting, but most importantly textures and stuff like that in the viewport.
Right.
That is sort of like, usually you see just gray shaded character, or not characters, but like, just simple colored and vertex textures here and there. But with real time catching up, it's more like, oh, we can actually do displacement, we can do normal maps, we can do this, and it actually looks pretty nice in the scene, and you get a better context of what you're actually going to see in the end. So that's very, very interesting. And just rendering with the path tracing now that is picking up in the game industry as well, like kind of merging the together, and soon it's just going to be ray tracing everywhere. And it's a very interesting time to be in the industry, I think.
I think it'd be great, as a lighting artist and a texture artist working together at the same time, or like, okay, no, it needs to be dark, and as this is happening and the lighting's changing, and you're two people working at the same time to get that look to look right, would be kind of an awesome thing to work on,
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're targeting with USD as well. Like, you get everything into the shot at the same time, and like, you would see the camera, you would see the character, you would see the lighting. You can turn it on if you're an animator. You can turn the lighting on and see it rendered. And you might say like, oh, this character that is in the dark way off, like, we don't need to animate them really well. You can just say like, or if some effects artist is coming in and it's like, oh, here's smoke, and then you don't see anything, and it's like, why did we spend time doing this? So with the iteration process and seeing everything in context, which is sort of tying into just having the iteration process in games, kind of bringing that over into VFX with USD is going to be a very cool thing to do.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, listen, this has been great. You guys have put some huge context into like the future of Pipeline and where everything's going. I know you guys have, like I said, we've been trying to actually do a podcast with you guys for like 6 months. It's been great. Process. And I know you guys have been super, super busy and showcasing all these amazing things. So it'd be really great. So can you tell us over the last, what you can tell us over the last, year or so, of some of the cool shows that you guys have done, that you guys are excited about, that you want to share with people to see some of the cool work you guys have done? What are you able to share?
I would say one of my favorite game trailers we made is the Valhalla Rising Assassin's Creed trailer. I thought that turned out super nicely, and also the Redfall trailer for Arcane Studios is also super awesome work.
Nice. Nice.
I would check out those.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that's really great. Well, listen, Erik and Dan, thank you so much for doing this and for being on the podcast and telling us about the future of Pipeline, because that's the thing. I think you guys have a good pulse on it, and you got a good idea on where USD is going and how that's going to work. And so I'm very excited about the future of Pipeline as well.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, I'm also always very excited about the future of Pipeline. Like, there's always so much stuff to do.
Yes, like, the efficiency, Derek. It's exciting.
Yeah. Which also ties into the real-time stuff, like, because it's mostly about increasing efficiency. Like, we want to get more content out in the shortest amount of time.
For sure.
Without lacking quality, so to say, but everything faster is what we try to strive for.
All right, cool. Well, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Erik.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much.